as you might imagine, the trend through 2026 isn't actually that Gen AI from end to end is the be all and end all. Businesses are starting to find a sweet spot.
There's an axis, right? And at this end, you've got hype. And at this end, you've got skepticism. And hype is, oh my God, let's do absolutely everything with AI. I want to put AI everywhere. I want AI to raise my children. And on this end, there is that skepticism of everything is working fine as it is. Why would we need AI at all?
When is it fair enough to use off the shelf, whatever the models are, versus when is it time to do something a little bit more?
If you are counting on it to generate your vision for you, and if you don't spend time actually refining that and becoming skilled in your work, then it will create something that is statistically average.
I always say that we're a species with amnesia because design process has to start with mapping the journey and mapping the process. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with CCW. The UK Summit is coming up on the 11th to 13th of May. I'm sure you know CCW. It is the flagship CX event globally, really. I mean, they've got cohorts all over the world, Europe, America. This UK Summit in May is set to be absolutely amazing. The keynote speaker is Rory Sutherland, who I'm personally a huge fan of. He's the vice president at Ogilvy, author, speaker, always talks great sense in terms of marketing, branding, customer experience, those kind of things. Got a very kind of keen eye and a good pulse on where things are heading and best practices and things like that. Speakers at the event, let's have a look. Virgin Atlantic, HSBC, Jaguar Land Rover, Carnival Cruises, Fidelity Insurance. You have, is Fidelity Insurance? I think it's insurance, isn't it? E.ON, Welsh Water, Vodafone, PayPal, Lloyds Banking Group, Transport for London, Ocado, Post Office, Virgin Active, Standard Chartered, Bupa, Asahi Group, Henkel, WWF, that's the World Wildlife Fund, not the World Wrestling Federation, British Airways, Estée Lauder, Sky, TalkTalk, you name it, the who's who of customer experience will be there. I'll be there as well. I'll have my camera and a microphone taking the pulse of the CX community and seeing what's occurring. If you want to attend, which I recommend you do, you can find tickets with the link below. If you're watching on YouTube or a video platform, you'll find the links below in the description or on the lower thirds here. And if you are listening on the podcast, check out the show notes and you'll find the link there. Hopefully, I will see you in May. This conversation is with Adrian Matei, who is a product manager for AI at Jaja Finance. Jaja Finance is a financial services company, it's a credit company, and Adrian looks after all of the AI products over there. Now, this conversation is an incredibly interesting conversation. We cover the use cases at Jaja Finance, including a bunch of Gen AI use cases, obviously, which is what this is all about. We talk in depth about what went into creating production-grade generative AI applications at Jaja Finance. What's the role of generative AI specifically? What's the role of deterministic technology as well? Because as you might imagine, the trend through 2026 isn't actually that Gen AI from end to end is the be-all and end-all. Businesses are starting to find a sweet spot where you leverage Gen AI for some things and more deterministic, rule-based programming and rules for other things. So this is a really great conversation about how and when to make that kind of decision. And we get into how that's been applied in the products that Jaja Finance has. We also talk more widely about how to approach agentic design from a design point of view. And spoiler alert, there's a lot of things that we've learned from the conversation design days and from design practices in general that still hold true today, even though the world might be telling you that AI is going to change everything and, you know, agentic AI is going to rule the world. Actually, you need to actually still design the thing that you are attempting to build. So we get into that as well. We get into agentic AI trends and, you know, how the reality of agentic AI is manifesting in businesses. Is it too early? Is the technology ready? Is OpenClaw for the enterprise anywhere close? We talk about how to make a decision between buying the technology versus building yourself based on the requirements that you have after going through your design process, and general learnings about what it takes to take Gen AI products into production. So this is a great conversation with Adrian. You're going to learn a hell of a lot. And without further ado, here is Adrian Matei from Jaja Finance on the VOX podcast. Adrian, thank you for joining me, my friend. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. I'm very excited. Thanks for the invitation.
Likewise. I don't know if I told you about this, but my middle name is Adrian.
You haven't? Well, look at that.
There you go.
That's a precursor for a great podcast.
There you go. Yeah. So yeah, cheers for joining me. Appreciate it. We met. We spoke prior, but we met at the Edinburgh Chatbot conference recently. European. I always forget what it's called. European Chatbot Conference or Chatbot and Generative AI Conference.
Conversational AI and Chatbot Summit, something like that.
Yeah.
A place with great community, let's put it like that, in Edinburgh. It was incredible, wasn't it?
It was good. Yeah, I've been there a number of times, and Sydney, who runs it, is a legend. So it was really great to meet. Good community, good vibes. So yeah, it was really good to meet you. Really good to share the stage with you as well. We did a panel together, which was really interesting. And you know, in our conversations, you've mentioned a number of use cases that you've been implementing at Jaja Finance, and a number of elements of your role that sounded really interesting. So I thought it'd be good to just hop on and have a chat about it and share some of your knowledge and experience with our listeners. You know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd love to share. We've been through some really cool journeys. I don't know if there's any expertise that came out of it, but there's definitely learnings that I'd be happy to share. So absolutely, it's a pleasure to be here. And likewise, thanks for all the great moderation in the panel. It was super nice. Yeah,
it was good. We got some good feedback from that panel, actually. I think the topic we were discussing was around kind of risk and compliance, and that's often obviously a topic sometimes that can feel a bit dry and a bit kind of like, oh, do we have to do this type? So you have to do, absolutely. But I think that we made it really, it was fun, it was light, you know, still deep in terms of like information shared, but nice and engaging the way that we did it. So it was great.
Yeah, delivery is at least 25% of the whole thing, right? If you have a message that's really engaging, usually delivery doesn't matter as much, but risk and compliance, I mean, come on, how many frameworks are there? How many documents do people need to put together? So I think it's really important to bring a positive attitude and bring an element of fun and try to make it very intelligible and digestible for people. So I'm glad if that message came across a little bit, if that delivery was good.
Cool. Yeah. So maybe it'd be interesting for our listeners, for you to share a little bit about what you do, who you are, what your Jaja Finance does, and maybe we can go from there.
Absolutely. So my name is Adrian, as you probably know from the introduction. And at the moment, I lead the Gen AI initiatives at Jaja Finance as a product manager. So Jaja is a credit card company. We provide credit cards for our own customers under the Jaja brand and also under several other brands in the UK, Northern Ireland, and a couple in Ireland. We place a very high importance on technology and on a very smooth user experience in the application, which makes the necessity for integration of cool AI features more or less essential. And since I've taken over, we've made very good steps in that direction. It's not all due to me. It's also because the industry has allowed us, right? The industry has been evolving to empower us to bring an agentic ecosystem, to bring a RAG system and whatnot. And also we have a really good and dedicated tech team at Jaja that's very kind of motivated to do good, useful things with all of these wonderful technologies that are emerging. So at the moment, we've got strong Gen AI presence in the following areas. In customer support, we're quite strong. Our in-app message center is primarily driven by AI. Her name is Airi. She is our chatbot. She is a RAG and agentic system with a very high knowledge base and 6 agents currently in production, helping users achieve various things on their accounts. We've got some enhanced spending analytics in the app with the natural language processor. So basically, you as a user can go into the app and we give you some summaries, some spending insights of this is how much you've been spending these months, these weeks, and whatnot. But what if you have a curiosity? What if you want to know how much you've been spending with a rideshare or with a specific food delivery platform in the last 6 weeks because you've had, I don't know, a spike or something in it? Well, you can do that nowadays. You can request that in the app with natural language and you'll get personalized graphs and tailored information delivered to you. And we're also now introducing Gen AI quite strongly at the investigative level. Obviously, when you deal with transactions, some of them are more suspicious than others. And when you do raise a case as a user, you expect that case to be handled with urgency. Naturally, the team can only have so many people. And so Gen AI can, we found, operate very well against a schema of criteria and at least summarize the case much better and identify details and nuances in the case to present them to the human agent, who will then more validate it rather than conduct the investigation by themselves. We also have machine learning models in production for credit decisioning and for other risk framework analytics. And those are performing quite well. We have very high true positives rates and very low false positive rates and false negatives. So we're very happy with those. And overall, I think what makes Jaja a really good place for AI is that there's appetite. There's been appetite since day one. And with AI so far, I've never been met with a no, we don't want to try that. Whenever, no matter how big or small the idea was.
Cool.
And that's what I do now, with the mention that I have a background in open source machine learning operations and managed services for MLOps, as well as some small toe dipped into the world of AI policy with the UK Centre for GenAI Ops, to which I contribute from the risk perspective.
Nice, brilliant. And so would you, it sounds as though then you're kind of more of a technical product manager. Would that be correct? Sounds like you've got a fairly technical background.
I would say so, yeah. So I did coding in university, then I refined my coding skills as much as I could, but I never shipped code to production myself. So I tread lightly around the world technical. Yes, I can understand codes. Yes, I can review a PR probably if it's not too complex. But I am definitely a product manager that works with devs, and I do not see the industry going to a place where devs are not important or essential anymore for shipping code, because I can vibe code, but there are so many vulnerabilities and nuances that only a trained eye can notice that my technical level only goes to a certain extent.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you wouldn't subscribe to the the kind of notion that AI and its ability to code is a threat to the developer community. It's more of an opportunity in helping them do more faster.
I think it's both. I think it can be a threat, but not in the threat of, oh my God, it's going to make software engineers obsolete, but in the way that it will change what a software engineer does, right? Writing code by hand probably is not the most interesting idea right now. There's definitely assistant tools that you can use as a developer or as a product manager to put together a prototype to start building it out. But you do need to have an eye formed enough to validate that output and to make sure that you put it in production, because ultimately you're responsible for it. I think we're very far away from a moment where we can hold AI responsible for a mistake. I think we're very far away from a moment when we can sue a large language model publisher for a mistake that the model did that we allowed in production or that someone else allowed in production. And so as a software developer, you, I think, become much more strategic than you were before. Which to me is an exciting moment, right? Because it means that software developers need to have input much earlier on in the process that they used to. There are teams in which they've already had input from the very beginning, and those I think are the highest performing dev teams and product teams and companies. But if they haven't so far, they become even more essential from the get-go, because they will know how to architect the prompt, how to make the code, how to validate the code, and how to ship it to production. I don't see that ending anytime soon.
Yeah, it's a bit like, I think AI like, you tell me if you disagree with this, but it seems to me that AI has had a very similar impact so far, outside of what we were just talking about, and we'll get back to those use cases you were talking about. So outside of kind of like, active business applications that are running in production using AI to service customer or user needs of some description. So things like development, writing, graphic design, web design, those type of areas where AI has made its way into people's work. I think that it's had a very similar impact across the board, which is it hasn't and won't replace developers. It just helps expedite the process a bit. It won't remove writers. It just helps writers synthesize ideas or come up with an initial structure or whatever it might be. The writer is always going to want to write it themselves if they're a good writer, because they want to put their own stamp on it. And synthesize their own thoughts. And the same way as if you like graphic design, so or UI design even, it allows you to get to a place where we can have a discussion about an idea very fast. We still need to make that idea turn into something that's worthy of shipping, but it just helps you get from idea to something tangible quicker, so that you can at least express what it is that we're each talking about.
I think you really put the dot on the I with a single word that you said, which is good designers, good writers. I think what AI is starting to do significantly is to widen the chasm between good and average, because average can be so easily generated that at this point it's easy to spot, right? Yeah. it's not this, it's this, it's not this, not this, it's clearly generated, right? And whenever you see that people are starting to understand when content is generated equally, if you go on any social media network, you can start to distinguish content that is generated from real content simply due to its quality and simply due to its providers. I think I'm trying to gather ideas because there was so much said right there, but it also emphasizes the importance of clear articulation and clear vision in everything that you do. A designer, a developer, a writer that has an image, a vision of what they want will always win with AI just like they won before, simply because AI is another tool to articulate that vision. So I think as long as you don't count on generative AI tools to create your vision for you, but just bring it to life, then you're going to win in the industry, and you're using it right in every sense, shape, or form. If you are counting on it to generate your vision for you, and if you don't spend time actually refining that and becoming skilled in your work, then it will create something that is statistically average, because that's what it does. It guesses the next word, which is the most average, the most likely statistics, top of the bell curve. So you'll never be more than average. The quality will never be more than average. So we get to see the good now.
Yeah. And when it comes to, I concur with that. And when it comes to the creation of AI applications, let's say your chatbot that you have in your mobile app, is there anything that you need to do or have done that aims to get around this concept of average? Because, for example, LLMs will do that. If you're going to write a poem with an LLM, it's going to end up being a very average poem. Might be a little bit of interest.
Roses are red, violets are blue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, something like that. But maybe in the world of customer experience, if you're going to classify something, if you're going to generate a response, average is probably good enough in terms of the ability. But then you're in the realms that a lot of people are starting to talk about now, which is we want it to sound a bit more like us. It doesn't really sound like our brand type of thing. So I just wonder what your thoughts are in terms of what do you think when you come to create a production grade AI application like the chatbot that you have? When is it fair enough to use off the shelf, whatever the models are, versus when is it time to do something a little bit more?
I wouldn't never ever just pluck something off the shelf if you want to, if you have concerns such as tone, if you have concerns such as coming across to your customers as a cohesive kind of brand tone, right? Because if you buy it off the shelf, it'll sound like Anthropic or OpenAI or Meta or whoever the publisher is. It's still a brand. This image of neutrality is not neutrality. It was prompted, but by someone else who has given you the power to reprompt it and give it your own flavor. And so it is your duty to do that. Otherwise, it obviously won't sound like you. It's not designed to. From that perspective, I think, and we've seen talks on this in Edinburgh as well. I do wonder what human-sounding customer support sounds like, because if you've called any call center in the world, I don't think you're met with a very authentically human tone. I think it's often, yeah, let me check that for you. Yeah, that looks good. It's a tone that's quite monotonous. Whereas when we were testing, so we have a team that tests voice chatbots in production. We don't have a lot of those. It's a very deterministic sense still, because we need hallucination grading at scale. But still, when we're testing it, it sounds much more eerie when it's very nice and friendly and authentic and it sounds super human and it's the most exciting thing to hear from you. It genuinely sounds eerie. We've tested this in a room, and at some point it made our skin crawl, because it doesn't sound like customer support. Customer support is neutral, is attentive to your needs, but without overindulgence and whatnot, because it needs to provide a smooth experience that gets you what you need and then gets you out the door. From that perspective, brand awareness is essential. When you talk about a credit card, when you talk about fintech, the first thing you talk about is FCA regulation. You have a duty towards your customer to serve their best interest at all times, regardless what happens. So the quality of customer support needs to be exquisite, delightful. You need to give the customer everything that they want. When you add brand image on top of that, you need to have a very clear idea of what your brand aims to deliver. So are you looking to be a very friendly, very kind of young sounding fintech? And we have many examples of those. Great. You can materialize that into your chatbot. Are you tailored to a different audience that values serious tones, that values formality, that values very clear information? So dimensions like the quality of language, the complexity of language, how educated do you count on the chatbot to be, how complex of words do you want it to use, and then your tone are essential to define internally. But that shouldn't stop at the chatbot, nor should it start at it. That should start at everything you do in terms of communications. So that is where your conversation designer, your communication managers come in, because they establish the overall tone of the company. What you do as an AI team when you build this tone into your chatbot is you borrow the company's wider tone. So it's a movement that needs to happen at a wider scale, and you just implement it in this pillar of the company like you've implemented other things. And this we found has delivered good levels of success with us, because Airi is cohesive with the Jaja tone, which is friendly but professional, serious. It delivers everything that you want. It's empathetic without being overly personal, right? You don't want to step into any personal boundary, because we do have people talking about their debt situations. We do have people talking about difficult things. You really don't want it to be, oh my God, are you okay? Because sometimes these things can happen with large language models. You need to be really careful and adjust and tweak. And as always, test, retest, and iterate.
And what's the best way of kind of imbuing the application with something like those brand values, that brand tone, that kind of thing? What's the kind of like, in the process of you kind of doing this, what's the best way that you found in order to get these models to behave like Jaja Finance, for example?
Well, beyond the test and iteration, which I've mentioned, we have a bunch of information that we feed into the chatbots that relate specifically to their tone. So this is the type of language you're supposed to use. Avoid using phrases that sound like X, Y, Z. And these things have been designed in extreme collaboration with the commercial and communication teams, so that we ensure that the tone of the chatbot is very much cohesive with the tone we sound in other pieces of communication to customers, which materialized into us actually borrowing elements from standard customer communication, pieces of language that we use, the way we refer to a user or a customer, right? Because those two things are very different. And the level of friendliness that we use outside. And for example, in correspondence and letters that we send in the in-app language, in the login journey, we have used elements of those in the prompt that we feed to the chatbot when it comes to tone and soul. And they've proven quite successful. There have been slip-ups, right? And I think with any LLM-based model, there will be a slip-up or two, which is where risk frameworks comes in, because that's when you decide what you do when things go wrong. But it overall proved a good level of success. It understood from the get-go how to position itself, and the rest was just nuance, which you then tweak in production as you scale.
Listen, you had a good approach to kind of like blending generative AI with more kind of hard-coded or handwritten responses. I wonder if you can share a bit more about that use case.
Well, I think it's really important to understand the fact that when a conclusion is the same for every customer, or when you need to disseminate a particular piece of information that always sounds the same, and it's not very dependent on tone, or rather it's not dependent on how the customer feels at the moment, but rather you just need to get that information across, it's much better to write a sentence and send it, right? You use much less compute power. And in today's world where we're very dependent on public cloud infrastructure or on-premises infrastructure that do have limits, and LLMs are very compute intensive, optimizing for that is essential. So when you don't need Gen AI, I'm a big fan of don't put it there. And we do have agents, we do have workflows that mix all of those. Most of the things that we have in production have at least some deterministic elements, maybe not language related. Most messages are generated on the spot. But for example, when the agent needs to make a decision based on some information that is available on the user's account, that decision is made mechanically. If this is present and this is present, then case X. And then in case X, you need to tell the customer this, and then the generative part happens. But why would we spend compute power and compute resource on running that investigation non-deterministically when the best results come from determinism. It takes a level of cynicism, and the way I see it and the way I present it whenever I get the chance to pull up a slide is there's an axis, right? And at this end, you've got hype. And at this end, you've got skepticism. And hype is, oh my God, let's do absolutely everything with AI. I want to put AI everywhere. I want AI to raise my children. And on this end, there is that skepticism of everything is working fine as it is. Why would we need AI at all, right? We should just leave things as they are. And none of those positions are healthy in every way. The skepticism because the world needs to keep evolving, and the hype because it lacks the cynicism and the analytical effect. So there's a point in the middle that I call the responsible point, or point of responsibility, a place where you have an intellectual approach, if you want, where you borrow hype and turn it into enthusiasm, and you borrow skepticism and you turn it into an analytical mindset. And then you say, okay, this looks interesting. Let me see if it's the best decision for me. And once you run that analysis, and however way you want, I have some frameworks for it, but everybody can develop their own, then it makes much more sense. I err to the more cautious, to the more conservative nature of, if I need to do 1 + 1 = 2, I will let the code do 1 + 1 = 2. And then I'll have a generative element on top of that says, your answer is 2. And take it from there.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, you know, you mentioned there that you've got the cynics and the hype peddlers, if you like. But most businesses at least operating at a relative amount of scale that we either work with or speak with on the podcast or come across at events, they are kind of all in a similar place. And it's the reality of what's happening in businesses is different to what you will observe outside looking at LinkedIn or the news or whatever, which is that, you're right, you know, if you're going to serve, I don't know how many customers Jaja Finance has, but let's say you're going to serve, I don't know, 1 million customers a month in your chatbot. Are you going to pay for 1 million interactions with LLMs times 12 months? It just doesn't seem to make sense to use a sledgehammer to crack a nut, yet there's still platforms that are being built today. I won't mention names, but there's providers that are building entire platforms off the back of LLMs where everything is LLM driven. Your reasoning is LLM driven, which is understandable, but your calculations are LLM driven, your workflows are LLM driven, everything's LLM driven. It seems to me to be, on the one hand, brilliant if that technology is able to be reliable enough to do this stuff consistently. Well, that's the thing, is it? And then even if it is it the best thing to do financially, you know?
First of all, it's not 1 million. It should be at least 3-4 million, because you need to have layers when you build an LLM-based system. I don't think you can just put an LLM API in production, let it generate an answer, and then just give it to a customer, because it hallucinates. So you need to have at least some sort of hallucination grading. You need to have input guardrails. You need to have output guardrails. And if you do those with regular expressions, you're going to have a long list of regular expressions to look for. And so that needs to be generative. And that's actually a very good use case for generative AI. So you start with at least 3 levels, and then you add on top, and then you add a lot of logic into it. So you start accruing quite a bill there. I think part of it is because a lot of publishers rely on a lot of funding, and they need to deliver results. And a very good way to deliver results is to have very strong marketing. And obviously that strong marketing materializes and finds its way onto the news, finds its way onto LinkedIn, finds its way in our devices in one way or another, and makes us wonder. But I think this is the oldest paradigm there is when it comes to media, but it's up to us to have a filter and understand, is this piece of information accurate? How can I test it? How can I interpret it? Do I need to create a whole platform that is more or less purely deterministic, but make it AI? What value does that bring? And that's where product management comes in. Because good product management, and this is what my first product mentor told me, answers a single question over and over and over again. What's best for the user? How can I deliver the user the best value, the best solution to this problem in the most optimal way possible? So if the user is interested in running calculations and they're very interested in me providing that solution to calculations for them, it's up to me to build a calculator, not an LLM based what is 2 + 2, oh, I think it's 5. It's up to me to give them the best, most optimal solution that costs them the least, that costs me the least, so I can make a little bit of profit and pay the bill for another month and acquire another user, and delivers on that value. And again, the difference between quality and average solutions, right? You need to keep the user at heart. And if you keep the user at heart, I don't think you'll make decisions like that, because you will understand that it's about what you deliver to them using all the tools you have, AI being one of them, not how can I look interesting by building things with AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, where do you think then, I think we've kind of covered quite a bit of this ground. I just wonder if we can close that kind of circle, which is, it sounds, if I summarize what we're talking about here, we've got a good place to use generative AI being anything that essentially is to do with understanding language. So you talked there about a pre-retrieval filter, you talked about a post-retrieval pre-response guardrail. Obviously, you want to do the summarization, you've got the brand tone bit to put in there, you've got everything that's concerned with understanding and generating language. And I wrote about
translation.
Translation, great, yeah. But I suppose that where I think there's a bit of a grey area, and opinion is split on this, is when it comes to orchestrating the workflow. Because one opinion is that business workflows are the same every time. Therefore, that makes perfect sense just to hard code the workflow. The LLM does the language and the dialogue, and you just hard code the elements of the workflow and all that kind of stuff. The other angle is that the workflow is so tied to the dialogue that actually you're better off having a large language model manage the workflow. I don't know if you've got any learnings or any perspectives on that.
Well, the world of internal agents is still evolving at the moment. So whatever opinion I will give, and I will try to give one because I'm chatty, but any opinion I give is bound to be completely inaccurate, because I think a year from now we'll have a very different perspective on what's happening. But I would argue, and what has worked for us, is we always start the diagram of an agent with the diagram of a business process. The good old business process model diagram with gateways, with yes or no's, with nodes. And we optimize the living hell out of that diagram to make sure that we have a very clear understanding of how that workflow works. What are the steps, deterministic or not, linguistic or not, that go into making a decision. And that can be anything from converting a Slack thread into a Jira ticket, which does work, to determining that a customer wants to close their account or make some sort of difference on it. Same business process model. Once you have that business process model, you adopt the mindset of variable isolation. So you take all of the steps and the nodes in that model and ask the question, on paper or not, directly or indirectly, can this benefit from some AI? If so, how? How much will it cost me? How much will it save me? You run the calculation. I do have a little equation that I use when I take care of this. So I look at how much it'll cost me to build the solution for this, and this implies engineering power. This implies all the time that the team spends mapping the process, retraining the people in using this issue and whatnot, times which you divide by the number of years you expect this to amortize in, and then you multiply it by the cost to maintain per year. How much does your infrastructure cost you? And then you divide that by your current cost per year times, and this is really important, your accuracy. Large language models and large language model systems will never be 100% accurate. And I think it's an unrealistic expectation to want them to replace 100% of a business workflow. There will always be outliers because we're talking again about statistics, and you need to have a plan on what you do with those. 50% sometimes can cut you way more cost than you think. 60%, 70% and whatnot. And that depends entirely on your appetite. But if I were to give 3 tips, it would be map out your business process very well and isolate your variables to understand what can be automated or not. Run the numbers and the calculation, and be very much aware of how much of that business process can you automate and what you will leave to a human eye, which will always be essential, at least for the foreseeable future.
That's very good. What's interesting there is, I think that, I've interviewed a number of technology companies, loads of them over the years, but I'm thinking of a couple in particular that I've interviewed recently that have developed, I suppose, what you could call quite an opinionated approach to how these systems should work, to the point where, you know, you can't really change a great deal. You can affect kind of what it does, but not really how it does it. So you can give it your data, but you can't really affect the retrieval pipeline or anything like that. You could give it your APIs, but you can't really affect the way in which it's making its decisions, apart from through a prompt that it will insert into its series of prompts. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of these providers are becoming a lot more opinionated. Your approach that you outlined there, which is a similar approach to us, which I think is the right approach and one that's been completely lost now. I always say that we're a species with amnesia, because design process has to start with mapping the journey and mapping the process, and then figuring out where's the waste and how do you consolidate and streamline, and then what's the best experience we can create, and then work back to what we can afford to do and the time we have, etc., etc., etc. So all that makes sense. That might, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'd be interested in what you've kind of learned when you've taken that forward to actually build something, is it might lend itself to you having to create specific kind of solutions or series of solutions that you can put together to create the application, and to do so in a way that matches the process that you want, that you've defined. It might mean that you might not find that in an off-the-shelf type of solution, because the solution's opinion of how things should be done might be different to how you've defined is best for the user. So to do this type of thing properly, I'm wondering where your thoughts are in terms of the whole buy versus build thing. Is it a build thing, or is there an option to buy? Like, where do you sit on that scale?
I think it very much depends on your use case, right? I'm sure usually the providers that do off the shelf have a very good instinct for the majority of the market and their user base, which means that it will satisfy a need and it will have use cases where it completely works. So I think it would be foolish to discredit that. There are situations where off the shelf works. It's up to the individual or individual company or individual team to decide whether that off-the-shelf solution works or not. Most of the solutions that are Gen AI based right now, but not only Gen AI based, are black boxes. You plug it in, you give it the input, and it creates the output that it wants to create to you. And you have to find ways to work around it, to tweak it within the limit that you're given, or to request features to the team if you want, which is highly profitable for the publisher and sometimes painful for the requester. At the same time, there is of open source solutions, of plug and play, of modular solutions that you can start playing with and building your own infrastructure. Both of those come with risk and benefit. Both of those. And it's really important to have a very clear understanding at a team level of what is your appetite. Do you want to innovate and build something that you have full control over? Then you go for a modular approach. Then you start taking elements from here, taking elements from there. And there are more and more providers that appear, including something that I'm discovering, which is much smaller models. So SLMs, small language models, are starting to populate the industry because they're highly trained on a particular topic and not very trained on other topics. So they can't really tell you about the weather, but they can definitely tell you about customer support and tone. Those are elements that are starting to bridge that gap and be both off the shelf and customizable. But the appetite is completely up to the company. I couldn't recommend a solution to everybody. There's no cookie cutter answer. For me personally, I've used both and I continue to use both. And I think it's about a mix of both. There are solutions that benefit from off the shelf simply because either we're in a hurry or we're not very fussed about customization. We just need something that we can feed some data, get the output, publish the output, or push it to production. Have a good day. It works. And there are times when we are very interested in customization and we want to have much more control for compliance reasons, for building reasons, for development reasons. And that is when we start building it ourselves. The decision should be taken just like every other business decision. What benefits us most? And I repeat, I'm going to get close to the microphone. What benefits the user?
Absolutely. Is there anything, and don't feel the need to if you can't, if this is sensitive, but is there anything you can share in terms of how you approached it? Was it a buy? Was it a build? Was it something in the middle? It
was a combination. It was a combination of both. So we do have a very healthy ecosystem of providers at Jaja that we work with, and there's very good collaboration there. And I think for a smaller company, Jaja is a scale up, right? We're not at a startup level, but we're not at IPO level either. You will rely on other companies to take you at least half the way, because that's how it works. You have a team that's relatively small. They need to dedicate their time on what really matters and on delivering the direct user value. So that's necessary. But there were moments when we analyzed a couple of solutions and we thought, well, these don't really give us as much control as we'd like to have. Let's try to build it ourselves. And we have delivered that. I'm not going to tell you which is which, but what I can tell you is that both have taken an equal amount of iteration, both have taken an equal amount of setup work, and both are delivering similarly good results. So we're very happy with the balance that we have right now. And Kane, I don't think there's an area of life where a balanced approach won't succeed.
I agree. I think that's part of the problem, is that the polarization that you come across is very much in line with the incentives of the individuals or companies that are putting those perspectives across. Whereas in reality, it's like, I don't want to get into political discussions, but I always found that that's exactly the same. A balance of being right in the middle of it all, right in the center seems to be the best place to be for everything. You take a bit of that, you take a bit of this, and there's nothing that's black and white,
I think the truth is always in the middle, but it very much depends on how you reach that middle. It's when you talk on a macro scale, it's usually reached by a lot of people on this end, a lot of people on this end, and because they crash, the truth still appears in the middle, but it's much more violent, right? Yeah. But it's still in the middle. Whereas there appears to be emerging actually a large population of people that actually spend some time to think about things, and instead of going one way or another, they position themselves already in the middle, and it's much less violent, much more peaceful, much more approachable. The difference is that this super extreme clash it's much more profitable, it's much more interesting to look at, and oftentimes is in the short term much more appealing. But for long-term results, I think having the understanding that there is no such thing as a perfect solution, there is no such thing as a perfect product, but there is always room to try again and be disciplined about it will benefit any team.
Absolutely.
Or any individual.
Yeah, I agree, yeah. Curious again to think about when it comes to sort of like product strategy. What you described at the top of the conversation is very similar to what I'm seeing in other organizations, which is the chatbot does its thing, and then there are other avenues of exploration around Gen AI that tend to manifest themselves in other areas. So a great example is exactly what you said, the spending analytics piece. How much did I spend in Costa last month? Too much probably, compared to the chatbot use cases. Is there? I wonder,
love a coffee.
Yeah. Is there a process you could walk us through in terms of how you make a decision regarding where these products should live? Should they all be accessed via one single interface? Should they be separate because that's where the user arrives, that type of thing? Like, I don't know if you've thought much about this, but I wonder if you can just share your perspectives on, where should different products live?
It depends on the purpose that they serve. I think when it comes to the customer support realm, if you have 3 products that serve the same purpose of supporting the customer and getting help with the app or with their user and experience, I don't have a problem with them living in the same space or even sharing knowledge between themselves. But when you're talking about spending analytics versus customer support, you really don't want to risk overlap of knowledge. And so separation is essential. It's all about separating solutions from solutions, right? If you're addressing the same problem, you have 3 hammers that beat the same nail, perfect, put them in the same toolbox. But if you have a nail here and a nail there, and then you have to do this and you have to use that tool and whatnot, then maybe separate toolboxes, even separate handyman would be essential. In terms of living, it's up to the discretion of the user, and I don't have a clear answer there, simply because why not test it? Put it all in one place, see what happens. I haven't seen yet a true native AI first app that's not centered around AI. So basically you open the app, let's say, let's stick to the realm of fintech, right? You open the app and instead of seeing all of these buttons, you just see a text input box. And you tell that text input, show me my balance, do this, do that. And there's nothing else. That text input controls everything. I hope at some point we'll get to see that. I would love to play with that. And that's where you kind of keep it monolithic. But even then, you are talking about agent isolation and orchestration and protocols. And so there will always be some level of isolation when it comes to addressing specific solutions. So I think that's the answer I have to give you. If it fixes the same problem, put it in the same spot. If it doesn't fix the same problem, separate it.
Yeah, I agree. And I had a perspective at one point at the early days of conversational user interfaces around this kind of like single entry point, and every business arguably is just a bunch of conversations anyway, and therefore every business should have a conversational front end and stuff. And I think that kind of logic goes so far, but then you realize that, well, there's lots of things that are limiting about conversational interfaces, and in a financial context, it's probably better for the user if the first thing they see when they open the app, as they do in every single financial services app, the first thing you see is your balance. Why ask for it?
Yes, sir.
Why wait for me to ask for the most common thing that I've gone there for in the first place? And then if it's one tap to see your most recent transactions, arguably that's easier than me having to say, can you show me my latest transactions? So it's exactly what we were saying in terms of the reality is somewhere in the middle, which is that the blending of graphical user interfaces and conversational user interfaces is where I think at least we'll sort of end up. I think we're still at the place where it's completely separate right now. The chatbot lives over here and the conversational interface lives over there. The website or the app lives here. I'm curious about your thoughts on what is kind of supposed being known as like the generative user interface and the true blending together of graphical user interfaces, conversational UIs. Is that something you've thought much about?
I don't think we're in a spot where we can ship this in production, a fintech product, safely. I personally am not brave enough to do that, simply because I think it's not the best thing to do for the user. If you watch a Wes Anderson movie, or if you are an adept of that Japanese philosophy of omotenashi, which a speaker at the EU Chatbot conference and summit was kind enough to tell us about, then you adopt the philosophy that good servitude to the user means anticipating their needs and solving them before they happen, which is not something that a mere generative conversational interface would do. The user would need to express that need, which I think is one step behind where we want to be in terms of delivering value to the user. We want to predict their requirements and their asks and provide them for them. Now, the middle ground there and the ideal space there would be a place that generatively predicts user intention based on past behavior. So I have this app and I interact with these three sections, and I've looked at this particular section. I don't know, I wanted to change the color in the app. Let's stick to something very simple and non-risky. I want to change the color of my app from purple to green. And I visit that page 3 times and I don't have the courage to do it because I don't know exactly what it'll do and whatnot. All of a sudden, I have a generative model that says changing your app from purple to green would materialize in this. Should I do it for you? Which can be unified across the entire app system to collect user behavior data and materialize that into intent prediction. But that brings the massive conundrum of, can you collect so much user data and can you in good faith analyze it without abusing it? And I think for now the answer is no.
Yeah.
I think we still need to, and this comes from policy, this needs to come from higher above. AI functions and predicts things on a lot of data. And it is very data hungry still, and it will continue to be hungrier and hungrier and hungrier. We need to be very careful what we feed it and what we allow ourselves to feed it, because that can come back and bite us in the butt.
Yeah. It seems to me that like the more you think about, what's the best experience that a business could provide their users, the more you think about that, the more you do get into the realms of proactive personalization, anticipatory stuff, even to the point where, you should resolve issues or could resolve issues before the customer even knows about it, and therefore prevent them from even having to open the app in the first place. So all this kind of stuff around like the best thing to do is to ultimately be so aware of your infrastructure, so aware of your products and services, so aware of your customers, that you can either anticipate problems before they arise and prevent them from arising, find problems that arise before the user knows they arise and fix them before the user has to reach out. When the user does reach out, use the data that you've got to be able to predict what they might be reaching out about, because you know that there's a problem and therefore you can anticipate why they're contacting. And failing that, do as best as you can to gather enough data, either from them being logged into their account or through the kind of back and forth of dialogue, to be able to serve them as efficiently as possible. That seems to be the kind of the nirvana that businesses are heading towards. But that, for me, And when everyone's talking about AI is the going to end all software development, everything I've just discussed there, I'm not sure how much of that is an AI problem.
Not at all. It's a unification problem, and well, of course, there's an AI element. There's another thing that I want to raise on this, and I got the thought as you were describing the issue, and this would only apply in an ideal world where you know that every creator of technology is fully benevolent, and there are no obligations to profitability and no debts to various financial institutions, and everyone is happy and wants to do good things. But in an ideal world, there would be a level of generative power or assistance at the hardware level. You have a bunch of apps. What if the generative power lies in your device, communicates with those apps, understands your own behavior and isolates it to that device, doesn't feed it anywhere else, but understands your behavior around those apps, and that is the engine that starts predicting your needs and taking information that the apps simply provide to it in a safe way and allows it to display and assist you in a better way. I think that would be the only way I see this going forward. That is generative in a way of we will need large language models to start communicating with the customer, but it's still mere coding. It's still data analysis. It's just about APIs on steroids, basically.
That sounds to me a little bit like the original goal of Siri. And what a lot of people are talking about now as being everyone's going to have their own personal AI assistant, some kind of thing that sits on top of Jaja Finance and on top of all of the apps that you use. And maybe that's what OpenAI is attempting to try and do, bringing on Johnny Ive to create some sort of devices. Maybe they're trying to displace the Siris and Alexas of the world, those kind of broad horizontal assistants that have, they exist at the edge, if you like, that the actual thing that you interact with is where they live. And so maybe that's what it is. Am I on the right lines? Is that kind of what you're getting at there?
From my perspective, yes, absolutely. And in a previous experience, I had some interesting touch points with AI at the edge, and it seems to be a very promising environment. Obviously, AI at the edge until 3-4 years ago was machine learning at the edge, right? And decision making based on that. But imagine generative AI at the edge. That would be brilliant, because you would have a language-based assistant that understands your language, speaks in your tone, understands how you want to achieve things and how you want to do things, and then also has the ability to interact with all of the software that guards your life. It is in every way a secretary, a personal assistant, and we've reached back to, it's literally like hiring somebody to update your systems and monitor your spending and do your accounting. It's just that. It's a personal assistant, but now it's going to be more accessible on your phone. However, a human personal assistant would have a lot of difficulty stealing your data, and would have a lot of difficulty not abusing your data, or would have a lot of difficulty not being coerced by a big social media giant to submit everything that it knows about your finances, about your spending behavior, so that you can receive more targeted ads. So that brings a new risk level that I don't think we're ready to explore just yet. Don't get me wrong, I think we'll have to explore it soon enough, because I don't think a lot of people care that deeply about that risk. But eventually that's where we'll get, I think, or I hope.
And what about if you bring that same idea a level down from that kind of distributor aggregator level and bring it into the world of Jaja Finance, and you talk about those more agentic applications that don't necessarily need a person to be there present all the time. They're off planning and doing things outside of the interaction, so to speak. So asynchronous process automation using agentic systems. That does then require different solution. It does require an element of planning, figuring out what systems do I need to use for this process and all this kind of stuff. Do you envisage a world anytime soon, or if ever, where those type of open claw style agentic AI multi-agent systems have a place in business?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know how long it'll take us to reach a level where we can do that safely. I think it'll be a combination of enforcing some security levels on this and simply adjusting our security appetite. Right now, OpenClaw has had multiple instances where it did some very random things to the user's data, to the user's computer, to the business data. So it's not at a space where businesses are comfortable incorporating it into their workflows. Does it take the businesses to change their appetite? Will people force the businesses to change their appetite by all using OpenClaw? And hey, if you don't want me with my OpenClaw, then you don't want me at all. Or will OpenClaw change, or the next OpenClaw change, and adapt to these security appetite frameworks? I think it'll be a middle ground, right? Where both parties will eventually give, and we will reach a point where, yes, it's in production, it does everything. But I really hope that we retain the analytical mindset and we still think for ourselves and validate that output, because I see a lot of people relying on AI output and not really paying a lot of attention to tweaking it or validating it anymore. I've had documents, marketing materials sent to me with, sure, here is a marketing advertisement tailored specifically for a product manager in fintech. That's how it began. I was like, you didn't even delete the opening paragraph, right? So yeah. I do think we retain that option and we continue to be analytical, because otherwise we're gonna enter a very scary world, I think.
How have you approached that in terms of the work that you've been doing at Jaja Finance, the whole kind of, quality assurance, testing, monitoring? Like, I wonder if you can share anything that you've learned in terms of best practices as far as that's concerned.
You reject anything that's not of quality, period.
How do you define quality?
Well, first of all, it looks thoughtful. It is in the style of quality of document that a person would expect from Jaja. And if you manage to achieve that with AI, that's totally fair. If I get a document that's fully generated and no one has ever looked through it, but I cannot tell, or it satisfies my need entirely without having any errors, kudos to you. You've done great, right? And if you manage to give that to me 100% of the time, even better. I don't need you to validate the output. But at the moment, that doesn't happen. You still need to throw an eye over it, tweak some things, have a vision, like I said, and articulate it. And so the best filter there is that, can you see a vision that's articulated using AI, or do you just see a prompt saying, I need a solution for this, come up with it and write a document, and then that's just pasted somewhere. I need a marketing material for this, write the copy, design the file, and send it to 100 people on LinkedIn.
Yeah. What about when it comes to the product side of things, of the things that you're working on? You've got a similar kind of challenge there, which is that you want this application to behave in a certain way, do certain things, respond in a certain way, and it needs to do that every time. What have you, what's the best practices, or what have you learned, or what have you been doing regarding achieving that from a sort of like testing and quality and monitoring type of perspective?
That's an appetite adjustment. So when you introduce Gen AI systems, expecting it to achieve the same thing every time, the same identical thing, is a wrong expectation. That's not generative. That is deterministic. And if you want that, hard code it, and it'll do exactly that. When you have a generative, I think it's about achieving the same, or for lack of a better word, the same vibe. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's about, do you deliver that message with the same cohesive tone, with the same friendliness, without much deviation from the brand values to the user, safely, correctly, all the time? And so the testing that we have in place for that has become much more rigorous, but is also generative in itself and understands language and produces output that is ultimately validated by humans, which is still very much essential. And we want to understand, we have a much more, not lenient schema, but a different schema of, is the output what we expect? It's not, is it identical to this? Is it not a regular expression or not? Because you won't find that. But is it what we expect? And all of a sudden, things start catching a different shape in that perspective.
Brilliant. And finally, is there anything that you could share with us in terms of, what has been the impact of these solutions that you have at Jaja Finance? Is there anything you can share in terms of the success that you've achieved, the outcomes? Like, how do you measure success? Like anything like that might help people tuning in.
At the moment, I see generative AI very much tailored towards cost saving. And I think it is not in a spot where it can generate a lot of revenue. A lot of people use it in business development. I don't think it is nuanced enough to achieve good results there. If you are on LinkedIn, you have sure received some sort of sales message or request. I have received certain requests that have been signed with a different name from the person sending it. I don't think it's there just yet, right?
Every day, yeah.
At Jaja, we focus a lot on improving the user experience, which will materialize in revenue in itself because users stay, users like the application, users get value from the application, so that helps in itself. And then there's a big cost saving element, and Gen AI has been crucial, instrumental in delivering these cost saving initiatives. And in a world where finances are more important than ever, cost of living is rising, everything is getting more and more expensive, and it's very turbulent. I think having an option to cut your costs safely is good. But then again, you need, once again, moderation. If you're expecting to slash the cost and it disappears and it never appears again, and you can just never hire any humans, that's never going to happen, right? But what we do instead is we try and think, how much of this, again, can we cover with AI? And then what do we leave to the human agents? What do we leave to the developers to look for? And those are the edge cases which tend to have the highest importance, because everybody deserves the same quality of support, but you still need customization, and that is achieved by a human. So the results that we have, which are significant and have helped the company, are mostly the result to a very balanced approach, just like we discussed before.
Yeah, that makes sense. And is it, so you said you care about the customer experience. Do you have a measure of what you constitute as good customer experience? Is it customer satisfaction? Is it effort score type of thing? Like, how do you think about that?
Well, it's an interesting one, because customer satisfaction is hard to measure in an area like ours. Obviously, you can do an NPS. Obviously, you can say, would you recommend us to a friend? But I think the ultimate test, and this is something that we don't achieve with an automated test, but it's just us taking a look at what the AI does. Is the customer's financial well-being well looked after? If the customer has a problem, is that problem solved quickly enough to allow them to either retain their financial well-being, or if they've managed to fall out of financial well-being, help them get back to it? And that is by looking at individual conversations. So we do have daily, if not twice daily, reviews of all the conversations that AI has. Obviously, not everything in minute detail, because we wouldn't have time for that. That would be counterintuitive. But we definitely skim through. And if it's a longer conversation, if it's a conversation that has some anomalies from what we've seen before, we definitely take a look at it. And those are the biggest sources of ideation that we get as well, because from customer interactions, we get to see what we can do next, how we can help the customer better and better and better. And so that is the ultimate test that we use. Brilliant. Is their well-being well looked after? And that's our mission to the end.
Brilliant. That's good. I mean, it's a unique one, that I suppose, but perfectly aligned to what you do. And so that's kind of a good example of how you can integrate the purpose of the company right the way down to the AI strategy, right the way through to the applications that you build and ship, which you'd be surprised how often it is that kind of central kind of vision flowing through everything is missing. But that's really good. Yeah.
Well, that's what it is. Are you clear in what you're trying to deliver? Yes. Then you can use AI as a solution, and that's it.
Yeah.
Right? If you're not very clear in what you're trying to achieve for your user, the AI will just add to your confusion. So what we know is that we want to help customers achieve financial well-being through credit. That's very much doable. How can we use AI as a tool to support us in that? So once we answer that question, we just look back and say, did we use it to achieve that? It's again that articulation of business purpose and that product vision of, are we serving the customer? Do we have their best interest at heart? If any company starts from that, using AI will be a breeze.
Yeah. Amen to that. Brilliant. Adrian, thank you so much for your time, my friend. This has been incredibly enlightening. Really appreciate it. Anything else you'd like to leave us with? Any other parting words of advice?
No, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much, Kane. It's lovely to meet you again and again and again. And many thanks to everybody who listened all the way to the end.
Nice one. Brilliant. Thank you again. And thank you all for tuning in. And we'll see you again on the next one. Thanks now. Bye.